one theater.
Take me to Marymount, California University.
And there were hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of people watching your lectures, because it wasn't just the first Stanford class, it was the class that everybody was watching, following along, because deep learning was this new thing, and it was the place you would go if you wanted to understand it. You had to go to Under Karpathy's class. That's where everybody went. I just want to clarify, there's more than 700 people who were active in that class.
Yeah, absolutely. I did think it had a larger reach than I had anticipated at the time, of course, by a lot. People come up to me randomly in conferences and even in a coffee shop and tell me that they saw my class and they really enjoyed it. And I've heard it many times, but it always brings the same amount of pleasure. And so I feel like that was a very good investment in time. Very proud of it.
When you go and check out one of Andre's videos, the most frequent comment is just 2 words: my hero. That's, you opened up a whole field for so many people that was hard to access, and all of a sudden they could be part of it. Now, how would you explain that moment that triggered you teaching the class? You said ImageNet happened in 2012. What happened there? What was that all about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when I first encountered deep learning in Jeff Hinton's class, we were working with these tiny black and white images. So these are tiny 28 by 28 images where you have like a single digit, like a 7 or a 6, and we're trying to recognize like what it is. And so deep learning, which is this class of neural networks approaches, where you basically have neurons that are connected to each other with different strengths, and you're trying to tune the strengths between the neurons so that they take your input, in this case, this image, and try to, the neurons fire in a sequence, and then the last neurons tell you which digit it is in the image. And so it's a class of technology that was used in these super toy problems. And when I entered Stanford and I was in computer vision, these approaches were not what you would use for computer vision applications. So computer vision was a field that was mostly working with much larger, higher resolution images. So we're talking, 1, 2, 3 megapixel inputs. So 1,000 by 1,000 images, real normal big images. And it was thought, and there was a very different class of approaches to how you, attack computer vision problems in those settings. And so at the time, no one was using deep learning in computer vision. Deep learning was this branch of machine learning out there somewhere, and it was very different, not used. And it was thought, the conventional wisdom at the time was that these approaches would not scale to large resolution images. And it was in 2012 that Jeff Hinton and his team in University of Toronto, Skrzewski and Ilya Sutskever, published a paper showing that a scaled up version of the neural network, really running on special GPUs in the computer, a special type of processor that is very good at running these kinds of computations that make up the neural network, that when you scale up these networks, so it's not just a little baby network with a couple thousand neurons, but it's actually a much bigger network with several 100,000 of them connected with like millions of weights and synapses, that actually these can do incredibly well, even on normal sized images, and achieve extremely good performance compared to what was available in computer vision at the time. And this turned the entire field upside down. It was a massive tectonic change in computer vision. So if you visited a computer vision conference in 2012, there would be basically like 1 or 2 papers on deep learning. But if you visited 5 years later, it would be 1 or 2 papers that are not deep learning. It was a complete upheaval. And today, of course, you would not dream of doing computer vision without deep learning. So I happened to be at the right place at the right time with interest in education, and stars sort of aligned in the way that I was able to explain the material and hopefully empower a lot of people to use this powerful technology for computer vision problems in the world.
You absolutely did. And I'm curious, if you had to describe just deep learning itself, how would you describe deep learning to, I don't know, your parents or, uncle or something who doesn't work in the space?
Let's use a specific example because I think it's useful. So let's talk about image recognition, right? So we have images, and images are made up to a computer of a large number of pixels, and each pixel just tells you the amount of brightness in the red, green, and blue channel at that point. And so you have a large array of numbers, and you have to go from that to, hey, it's a cat or a dog. And typical conventional software is written by a programmer, writing a series of instructions to go from the input to the output. So in this case, you want someone to write a program for how do you combine these millions of pixel values into, like, is it a cat or a dog? Turns out no one can write this program. It's a very complicated program because there's a huge amount of variability in what a cat or a dog can look like in different brightness conditions, arrangements, poses, occlusions. Basically, no one can write this program. So deep learning is a different class of programming, in my mind, where no one is explicitly writing the algorithm for this recognition problem. Instead, we are structuring the entire process slightly differently. So in particular, we arrange a large data set of possible images and the desired labels that should come out from the algorithm. So, hey, when you get this input, this is a cat. When you get this output, this should be a dog, and so on. So we're kind of stipulating what is the desired behavior on a high level. We're not talking about what is the algorithm. We're measuring the performance of some algorithm. And then roughly what we do is we lay out a neural network. It's a bunch of neurons connected to each other with some strengths, and you feed them images and they predict what's in them. And the problem now is reduced because you're just trying to find the setting of these synaptic strengths between the neurons so that the outcomes are what you want. And so as an example, the 2012 ImageNet model, which was roughly 60 million parameters. So the weights of the neural network were really 60 million knobs, and those knobs can be arbitrary values. And how do you set the 60 million weights so that the network gives you the correct predictions? And so deep learning is a way of training this neural network and finding a good setting of these 60 million numbers. And so roughly, the neural network sort of looks at the image, gives you a prediction, and then you measure the error. It's like, okay, you said this is a cat, but actually this is a dog. And there's a mathematical procedure for tuning the strengths so that the neural network adapts itself to agree with you. And so deep learning is basically a different software programming paradigm where we specify what we want, and then we use sort of mathematics and algorithms to tune the system to give you what you want. And there's some design that goes into the neural network architecture and how do you wire everything up. But then there's also a huge amount of design and effort spent on the data sets themselves and curating them. And, because those data sets are now your constraints on the behavior that you are asking from the system. So it's a very different way of approaching problems that was not there before. Everything used to be written by a person. Now we just write the specification and we write a rough layout of the algorithm, but it's what I refer to as fill-in-the-blanks programming, because we sort of lay out an architecture and a rough layout of the net, but there's a huge amount of blanks, which are the weights and the knobs, and those are set now during the training of this network. So that's, I think, the bird's eye view of how this is different.
I like the way you explain that, and it's of course no coincidence that you're heading up self-driving at Tesla and that you're one of the world-leading experts in this exact discipline of deep learning. There's got to be a strong connection there. So I want to go a little bit towards the Tesla side of things. What was the moment you decided to join Tesla? How did that come about?
Yeah, so after my PhD at Stanford, I went to be a research scientist, one of the founding members at OpenAI, which is where we overlapped briefly as well. And I spent about almost 2 years at OpenAI. And by the time of 2 years at OpenAI, I have been doing research for about a decade. So my master's degree, my PhD, and then OpenAI. And so I spent about a decade reading and writing papers and working on, training neural networks, but in an academic setting mostly. And so I was definitely getting a little bit restless at that time because I felt like these algorithms are extremely powerful and can really move the needle on some very incredibly important problems in society. I wanted to take a more active role in doing that. And so I was getting a bit restless. I was looking at different opportunities in, say, startups and things like that. And then one thing that kind of happened on the side is because OpenAI was at the time under the umbrella of Elon organizations, a few times we were interacting with people at Tesla, and I was kind of consulting a little bit for some of the problems in the autopilot. I kind of realized that they were dealing with fundamentally a deep learning computer vision problem, and this was the fundamental constraint to whether or not this product would work. So I was kind of intrigued by that, but it was just a few consulting opportunities here and there. I sort of spoke to the team. But at this time, when I was getting really restless to apply this technology in the industry, actually Elon reached out and he asked me, hey, you've been sort of consulting for the team. Do you actually want to join and lead the computer vision team and the AI team here and help get this car to drive? And so he caught me at a very kind of correct time when I was really getting restless, and I felt like this is perfect. And I think I can do this. I think I have the skills to contribute here. This is an incredibly impactful opportunity, and I love the company. And of course, I love Elon and everything that he's doing. And so I would say that, again, sort of it was a moment where stars aligned for me, and I felt very strongly that this is the right thing to do at this time. And so I left OpenAI, and I've been at Tesla for the last 4 years or so, almost. So yeah, it's been some time.
Yeah, I've been there for 4 years, and kind of funnily, I remember this moment where you were just about to leave OpenAI, and a bunch of us are chatting about your plans and joking, but you're also half serious, and you're saying, well, this is a job that on average people last 6 months. And here you are, almost 4 years, and knock on wood, this is just amazing.
Yeah, that's accurate. I was aware of the average tenure at Tesla, especially when you're working on very important projects very close to Elon. And so, yeah, I was very much aware of this. So when I made the transition to Tesla, for example, I did not give up my apartment in San Francisco because I was just kind of like, really hedging my bets on what's going to happen in the next few months. But yeah, here I am 4 years later, still here.
I'm curious, if you look at the Tesla mission statement, it's about transition to renewable energy, right? Which at first sight doesn't seem to directly tie into self-driving being kind of part of wanting to transition to renewable energy. So can you say a bit about how self-driving and renewable energy play together?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think broadly, Elon sort of has a number of companies and a number of bets around just a higher level goal of making the future good, increase the probability of the future being good. There's many aspects to that, of course, and he's focused the Tesla mission around accelerating the transition to sustainable energy. Fundamentally, a large piece of this is getting people to transition to electric vehicles, and we need to manufacture them at scale, and we want them to look like the future. And so the entire product itself sort of looks like the future. It's a very clean design, and you want to be inspired by progress in society and that things are developing in a positive direction. And so the car looks much more futuristic. And I think a big part of that also is that the car becomes, it just becomes something magical in your life that can take you around in this beautiful future. And so I think autonomy really is part of just a broader vision to this future that we want to be part of, where we are driving electric vehicles with very little footprint, and the society is sort of automated to a large extent. And there's a huge amount of problems, of course, also around transportation and putting people in the loop with the amount of accidents that they get into, and also with the fact that you don't want people to be really driving these cars because human brain is capable of so many beautiful things. So why should you solve the line following problem? That is not a good use of the brain. So not only is it unsafe to drive these cars, it's also just you want the brains to be doing something different. And so we have the technology to address this. So that's why we're working on it.
That's really intriguing. The way I'm internalizing this is that if you want people to transition off something they like, people like their existing cars, you can't just tell them, let go of your existing cars and stop using them. You got to show them something even shinier that in the process also gets them onto renewable.
Yeah, we want people to transition to electric vehicles that are also very competent in the world and transport you around.
Before we dive into the technology itself for self-driving, I've got another question at a higher level, which is, how is it working with Elon Musk? He might well be the most famous person in the world at this point, and you are actually working with him.
Mm-hmm.
What is that like?